23. Outside a regular cop convention was shaping up. Blue trooper cars, white cruisers from the Lewiston PD, a black and white from Brunswick, 2 more from Auburn. The police responsible for this automotive cornucopia ran hither and yon, ducked over low. More newsmen showed up. They poked cameras with Cobra-like telephoto lenses over the hoods of their vehicles. Sawhorses had been set up on the road above and below the school, along with double rows of those sooty, like kerosene pots. To me, those things always looked like the bombs of some cartoon anarchist. The DPW people had put up a detour sign. I guess they didn't have anything more appropriate in stock. Slow, madman at work, for instance. Don Grace and good old Tom were hobnobbing with a huge blocky man in a state police uniform. Don seemed almost angry. The big blocky man was listening but shaking his head. I took him to be Captain Frank Philbrick of the Maine State Police. I wondered if he knew I had a clear shot at him. Carol Granger spoke up in a trembling voice. The shame on her face was alarming. I hadn't told that story to shame her. I was just a kid, Charlie. I know that, I said and smiled. You were awful pretty that day. You sure didn't look like a kid. I had kind of a crush on Dickie Cable too. After the party and all? She looked even more ashamed. Worse than ever. I went with him to the 8th grade picnic. He seemed, daring, I guess. Wild. At the picnic he got fresh and I let him a little. But that was the only time I went any place with him. I don't even know where he is now. Placerville Cemetery, Dick Keane said flatly. It gave me a nasty start. It was as if I'd just seen the ghost of Mrs. Underwood. I could still have pointed to the places where Dickie had pounded on me. The idea that he was dead made for a strange, almost dreamy terror in my mind, and I saw a reflection of what I was feeling on Carol's face. He got fresh, and I let him a little, she had said. What exactly did that mean to a bright college-bound girl like Carol? Maybe he had kissed her. Maybe he'd even gotten her out into the pucker brush and mapped the virgin territory of her burgeoning chest. At the 8th grade picnic, God save us all, he had been daring and wild. What happened to him? Don Lordy asked. Dick spoke slowly. He got hit by a car. That was really funny. Not ha-ha, but peculiar. He got his driver's license just last October, and he used to drive like a fool, like a crazy man. I guess he wanted everybody to know he had, balls. It got so that no one would ride with him hardly. He had this 1966 Pontiac, did all the bodywork himself, painted her bottle green with the ace of spades on the passenger side. Sure, I used to see that around, Melvin said. Over by the Harlow wreck. Put in a Hurst 4-shifter all by himself, Dick said. 4-barrel carb, overhead cam, fuel injection. She purred. 90 in second gear. I was with him one night when he went up the Stackpole Road in Harlow at 95. We go around Brissett's Bend and we start to slide. I hit the floor. You're right, Charlie. He looked weird when he was smiling. I don't know if he looked exactly like a lawnmower, but he sure looked weird. He just kept grinning and grinning all the time we were sliding. And he goes like to himself, he goes, I can hold her, over and over again. And he did. I made him stop and I walked home. My legs were all rubber. A couple of months later, he got hit by a delivery truck up in Lewiston while he was crossing Lisbon Street. Randy Milliken was with him, and Randy said he wasn't even drunk or stoned. It was the truck driver's fault entirely. He went to jail for 90 days, but Dickie was dead. Funny. Carl looked sick and white. I was afraid she might faint, and so to take her mind somewhere else, I said, Was your mother mad at me, Carl? Huh? She looked around in that funny, startled way she had. I called her a bag. A fat old bag, I think. Oh, she wrinkled her nose and then smiled gratefully, I think, picking up on the gambit. She was. She sure was. She thought that fight was all your fault. Your mother and my mother used to be in that club, didn't they? Books and bridge, yeah. Her legs were still uncrossed and now her knees were apart a little. She laughed. I'll tell you the truth, Charlie. I never really cared for your mother, even though I only saw her a couple of times to say hi to. My mother was always talking about how dreadfully intelligent Mrs. Decker was, what a very fine grasp she had on the novels of Henry James, stuff like that, and what a fine little gentleman you were. Slicker than owl shit, I agreed gravely. You know, I used to get the same stuff about you. You did? Sure. An idea suddenly rose up and smacked me on the nose. How could I have possibly missed it so long, an old surmiser like me? I laughed with sudden sour delight. And I bet I know why she was so determined I was going to wear my suit. It's called matchmaking, or wouldn't they make a lovely couple, or think of the intelligent offspring, played by all the best families, Carol. Will you marry me? Carol looked at me with her mouth open. They were... She couldn't seem to finish it. That's what I think. She smiled. A little giggle escaped her, and then she laughed right out loud. It seemed a little disrespectful of the dead, but I let it pass. Although, to tell you the truth, Mrs. Underwood was never far from my mind. After all, I was almost standing on her. That big guy's coming, Billy Sawyer said. Sure enough, Frank Philbrick was striding toward the school, looking neither right nor left. I hoped the news photographers were getting his good side. Who knew? He might want to use some of the pics on this year's Christmas cards. He walked through the main door, down the hall as if in another world. I could hear his vague steps pause and then go up to the office. It occurred to me in a strange sort of way that he seemed real only inside. Everything beyond the windows was television. They were the show, not me. My classmates felt the same. It was on their faces. Silence. Chink! The intercom. Decker? Yes, sir, I said. He was a heavy breather. You could hear him puffing and blowing into the mic up there like some large and sweaty animal. I don't like that. I never have. My father is like that on the telephone. A lot of heavy breathing in your ear so you can almost smell the scotch and Pall Malls in his breath. It always seems unsanitary and somehow homosexual. This is a very funny situation you've put us all in, Decker. I guess it is, sir. We don't particularly like the idea of shooting you. No, sir, neither do I. I wouldn't advise you to try. Heavy breathing. Okay, let's get it out of the hen house and see what we got in the sack. What's your price? Price? I said. Price? For one loony moment, I had the impression he had taken me for an interesting piece of talking furniture. A Morris chair, maybe, equipped to huckster the prospective buyer with all sorts of pertinent info. At first, the idea struck me funny. Then it made me mad. For letting them go, what do you want? Airtime? You got it. Some sort of statement of the papers? You got that. Snort, snort, snort. Likewise. Puff, puff, puff. But let's do it and get it done before this thing turns into a hairball. But you got to tell us what you want. You, I said. The breath stopped. Then it started again, puffing and blowing. It was starting to really get on my nerves. You'll have to explain that, he said. Certainly, sir, I said. We can make a deal. Would you like to make a deal? Is that what you were saying? No answer. Puff, snort. Philbrick was on the 6 o'clock news every Memorial Day and Labour Day reading a please drive safely message off the teleprompter with a certain lumbering ineptitude that was fascinating and almost endearing. I had felt there was something familiar about him, something intimate that smacked of déjà vu. Now I could place it. The breathing. Even on TV, he sounded like a bull getting ready to mount Farmer Brown's cow in the back 40. What's your deal? Tell me something first, I said. Is there anybody out there who thinks I might just decide to see how many people I can plug down here? Like Dawn Grace, for instance. That piece of shit, Sylvia said, then clapped a hand over her mouth. Who said that? Philbrick barked. Sylvia went white. Me, I said. I have certain transsexual tendencies too, sir. I didn't figure he'd know what that meant and would be too wary to ask. Could you answer my question? Some people think you might go the rest of the way out of your gourd. Yes, he answered weightily. Somebody at the back of the room tittered. I don't think the intercom picked it up. Okay then, I said. The deal is this. You be the hero. Come down here, unarmed, come inside with your hands on your head, I'll let everybody go. Then I'll blow your fucking head off. Sir, how's that for a deal? You buy it? Puff, snort, blow. You got a dirty mouth, fella. There are girls down there, young girls. Irma Bates looked around, startled as if someone had just called her. The deal, I said. The deal. No, Philbrick said. You'd shoot me and hold on to the hostages. Puff, snort. But I'll come down. Maybe we can figure something out. Fella, I said patiently, if you sign off and I don't see you going out the same door you came in within 15 seconds, someone in here is just going to swirl down the spout. Nobody looked particularly worried at the thought of just swirling down the spout. Puff, puff. Your chances of getting out of this alive are getting slimmer. Frank, my man, none of us get out of it alive. Even my old man knows that. Will you come out? No. If that's how you feel. He didn't seem upset. There's a boy named Jones down there. I want to speak with him. It seemed okay. You're on, Ted, I told him. Your big chance, boy. Don't blow it. Folks, this kid is going to dance his balls off before your very eyes. Ted was looking earnestly at the black grating of the intercom. This is Ted Jones, sir. On him, sir, sounded good. Is everyone down there still all right, Jones? Yes, sir. How do you judge Decker's stability? I think he's apt to do anything, sir, he said, looking directly at me. There was a savage leer in his eyes. Carol looked suddenly angry. She opened her mouth as if to refute, and then, perhaps remembering her upcoming responsibilities as valedictorian and leading lamp of the Western world, she closed her mouth with a snap. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Ted looked absurdly pleased at being called Mr. Decker. Right here. Snort, snort. Be seeing you. I better see you, I said. 15 seconds. Then as an afterthought. Philbrick. Yeah? You've got a shitty habit, you know it? I've noticed it on all those TV drive safely pitches that you do. You breathe in people's ears. You sound like a stallion in heat, Philbrick. That's a shitty habit. You also sound like you're reading off a teleprompter even when you're not. You ought to take care of stuff like that. You might save a life. Philbrick puffed and snorted thoughtfully. Screw, buddy, he said, and then the intercom clicked off. Exactly 12 seconds later, he came out the front door, striding stolidly along. When he got to the cars that had been driven onto the lawn, there was another conference. Philbrick gestured a lot. Nobody said anything. Pat Fitzgerald was chewing a fingernail thoughtfully. Pigpen had taken out another pencil and was studying it, and Sandra Cross was looking at me steadily. There seemed to be a kind of mist between us that made her glow. What about sex? Carl said suddenly, and when everyone looked at her, she coloured. Male, Melvin said, and a couple of the jocks in the back of the room haw-hawed. What do you mean? I asked. Carl looked very much as if she wished her mouth had been stitched closed. I thought when someone started to act, well, strangely. She stopped in confusion, but Susan Brooks sprang to the ramparts. That's right, she said, and you all ought to stop grinning. Everyone thinks sex is so dirty. That's half what's the matter with all of us. We worry about it. She looked protectively at Carol. That's what I meant, Carl said. Did you have some bad experience? Nothing since that time I went to bed with Mom, I said blandly. An expression of utter shock struck her face, and then she saw I was joking. Pigpen snickered dolefully, and then went on looking at his pencil. No, really, she said. Well, I said, frowning, I'll tell you about my sex life if you'll tell me about yours. Oh, she looked shocked again, but in a pleasant way. Gracie Stanner laughed. Cough up, Carol! I'd always gotten a murky impression that there was no love lost between those two girls, but now Grace seemed genuinely to be joking, as if some understood but never mentioned inequality had been erased. Ray, Corky Harold said, grinning. Carol was blushing furiously. I'm sorry I asked. Go on, Don Lordy said. It won't hurt. Everybody would tell, Carol said. I know the way people talk around. Secrets, Mike Gavin whispered hoarsely. Give me more secrets. Everybody laughed. but it was getting to be no laughing matter. "You're not being fair," Susan Brooks said. "That's right," I said. "Let's drop it." "Oh, never mind," Carl said. "I'll talk. I'll tell you something." It was my turn to be surprised. Everybody looked at her expectantly. I didn't really know what they expected to hear, a bad case of penis envy maybe, or 10 nights with a candle. I figured they were in for a disappointment, whatever it was. No whips, no chains, no night sweats. Small town virgin. Fresh, bright, pretty. And someday maybe she would blow Placerville and have a real life. Sometimes they change in college. Some of them discover existentialism and anatomy with hash pipes. Sometimes they only join sororities and continue with the same sweet dream that began in junior high school. A dream so common to the pretty small-town virgins that it almost could have been cut from a simplicity pattern, like a jumper or your yummy summer blouse or play skirt. There's a whammy on bright girls and boys. If the bright ones have a twisted fibre, it shows. If they don't, you can figure them as easily as square roots. Girls like Carl have a steady boyfriend, enjoy a little necking, but as the tubes say, don't touch me there. Nothing overboard. It's okay, I guess. You'd expect more, but so sorry, please, there just isn't. Bright kids are like TV dinners. That's all right. I don't carry a big stick on that particular subject. Smart girls are just sort of dull. And Carl Granger had that image. She went steady with Buck Thorne, the perfect American name. Buck was the centre of the Placerville High Greyhounds, which had posted an 11-0 record the previous fall. A fact that Coach Bob Stoneballs Stoneham made much of at our frequent school-spirited assemblies. Thorne was a good-natured shit who weighed in at a cool 210. Not exactly the brightest thing on 2 feet, but college material, of course. And Carol probably had no trouble keeping him in line. I've noticed that pretty girls make the best lion tamers too. Besides, I always had an idea that Buck Thorne thought the sexiest thing in the world was a quarterback sneak right up the middle. "I'm a virgin," Carol said defiantly, startling me up out of my thoughts. She crossed her legs as if to prove it symbolically, then abruptly uncrossed them. "And I don't think it's so bad either. Being a virgin is like being bright." "It is?" Grace Stanner asked doubtfully. "You have to work at it," Carol said. "That's what I meant. You have to work at it." The idea seemed to please her. It scared the hell out of me. "You mean Buck never..." "Oh, he used to want to. I suppose he still does, but I made things pretty clear to him early in the game. And I'm not frigid or anything, or a Puritan. It's just that..." She trailed off, searching. "You wouldn't want to get pregnant?" I said. "No," she said almost contemptuously. "I know all about that." With something like shock, I realised she was angry and upset because she was. Anger is a very difficult emotion for a programmed adolescent to handle. I don't live in books all the time. I read all about birth control and... She bit her lip as the contradiction of what she was saying struck her. "Well," I said. I tapped the stock of the pistol lightly on the desk blotter. "This is serious, Carol. Very serious. I think a girl should know why she's a virgin, don't you?" "I know why." "Oh," I nodded helpfully. Several girls were looking at her with interest. "Because..." Silence. Faintly, the sound of Jerry Kesserling using his whistle to direct traffic. "Because..." She looked around. Several of them flinched and looked down at their desks. Just then I would have given my house and lot, as the old farmers say, to know just how many virgins we had in here. "And you don't all have to stare at me. I didn't ask you to stare at me. I'm not going to talk about it. I don't have to talk about it." She looked at me bitterly. "People tear you down. That's it. They grind you if you let them, just like Pigpen said. They all want to pull you down to their level and make you dirty. Look at what they're doing to you, Charlie." I wasn't sure they had done anything to me just yet, but I kept my mouth shut. I was walking along Congress Street in Portland just before Christmas last year. I was with Donna Taylor. We were buying Christmas presents. I'd just bought my sister a scarf in Porteous Mitchell, and we were talking about it and laughing. Just silly stuff. We were giggling. It was about 4 o'clock and just started to get dark. It was snowing. All the coloured lights were on and the shop windows were full of glittering packages. Pretty. And there was one of those Salvation Army Santa Clauses on the corner by Jones's bookshop. He was ringing his bell and smiling. I felt good. I felt really good. It was like the Christmas spirit and all that. I was thinking about getting home and having hot chocolate with whipped cream on top of it. And then this old car drove by and whoever was driving cranked his window down and yelled, "Hi, cunt!" Anne Lasky jumped. I have to admit that the word did sound awfully funny coming out of Carol Granger's mouth. Just like that, she said bitterly. It was all wrecked, spoiled, like an apple you thought was good and then bit into a wormhole. Hi, cunt. As if that was all there was, no person, just a Her mouth pulled down in a trembling, agonized grimace. And that's like being bright too. They want to stuff things into your head until it's all filled up. It's a different hole, that's all. That's all. Sandra Cross's eyes were half closed as if she'd dreamed. You know, she said, I feel funny. I wanted to jump up and tell her to keep her mouth shut, tell her not to incriminate herself in this fool's parade, but I couldn't. Repeat, couldn't. If I didn't play by my rules, who would? I feel like this is all, she said. Either all brains or all cunt, Carol said with brittle good humour. Doesn't leave room for much else, does it? Sometimes, Sandra said, I feel very empty. Carol began and then looked at Sandra startled. You do? Sure. She looked thoughtfully out the broken windows. I like to hang out clothes on windy days. Sometimes that's all I feel like. A sheet on the line. You try to get interested in things, politics, the school. I was on the student council last semester, but it's not real, and it's awfully dull. And there aren't a lot of minorities or anything around here to fight for, or, well, important things. And so I let Ted do that to me. I looked carefully at Ted, who was looking at Sandra with his face frozen. A great blackness began to drizzle down on me. I felt my throat close. It wasn't so hot, Sandra said. I don't know what all the shouting's about. She looked at me, her eyes widening, but I could hardly see her. But I could see Ted. He was very clear. In fact, he seemed to be lit by a strange golden glow that stood out in the new clotted darkness like a halo, a supernormal aura. I raised the pistol very carefully in both hands. For a moment I thought about the inner caves of my body, the living machines that run on in the endless dark. I was going to shoot him, but they shot me first. 24. I know what happened now, although I didn't then. They had the best sharpshooter in the state out there, a state policeman named Daniel Malvern from Kent's Hill. There was a picture of him in the Lewiston Sun after everything was all over. He was a small man with a crew cut. He looked like an accountant. They had given him a huge Mauser with a telescopic sight. Daniel Malvern took the Mauser to a gravel pit several miles away, test-fired it, and then brought it back and walked down to one of the cruisers parked on the lawn with the rifle stuffed down his pant leg. He rested in the prone position behind the front fender in deep shadow. He gauged the windage with a wet thumb. Nil. He peered through the telescopic sight. Through the 30 times cross-hatched lens, I must have looked as big as a bulldozer. There was not even any window glass to throw a glare because I had broken it earlier when I fired the pistol to make them stop using the bullhorn. An easy shot. But Dan Malvern took his time. After all, it was probably the most important shot of his life. I was not a clay pigeon. My guts were going to splatter all over the blackboard behind me when the bullet made its mushrooming exit. Crime does not pay. Looney bites the dust. And when I half rose, half leaned over Mrs. Underwood's desk to put a bullet in Ted Jones, Dan's big chance came. My body half twisted towards him. He fired his weapon and put the bullet exactly where he'd hoped and expected to put it, through my breast pocket, which lay directly over the living machine of my heart, where it struck the hard steel of Titus, the helpful padlock. "25. I held onto the pistol. The impact of the slug knocked me straight backward against the blackboard, where the chalk ledge bit cruelly into my back. Both of my Cordovan loafers flew off. I hit the floor on my fanny. I didn't know what had happened. There was too much all at once. A huge auger of pain drilled my chest, followed by sudden numbness. The ability to breathe stopped. Spots flashed in front of my eyes. Irma Bates was screaming. Her eyes were closed, her fists were clenched, and her face was a hectic patched red with effort. It was far away and dreamy, coming from a mountain or a tunnel. Ted Jones was getting out of his seat again, floating really, in a slow and dreamy motion. This time he was going for the door. "They got the son of a bitch!" His voice sounded incredibly slow and draggy, like a 78 RPM record turned down to 33 and a third. "They got the crazy..." "Sit down." He didn't hear me. I wasn't surprised. I could hardly hear myself. I didn't have any wind to talk with. He was reaching for the doorknob when I fired the pistol. The bullet slammed into the wood beside his head and he shied away. When he turned around, his face was a stew of changing emotions. White astonishment, agonized unbelief, and twisted, murdering hate. "You can't. You're..." "Sit down." A little better. Perhaps 6 seconds had gone by since I'd been knocked on my ass. "Stop yelling, Irma." "You're shot, Charlie," Grace Stanner said calmly. I looked outside. The cops were rushing the building. I fired twice and made myself breathe. The auger struck again, threatening to explode my chest with pain. "Get back! I'll shoot them!" Frank Philbrick stopped and looked around wildly. He seemed to want a telephone call from Jesus. He looked confused enough to try and carry on with it, so I fired again, up in the air. It was his turn to go 100 miles in his head during half a second. "Get back!" he yelled. "Get the Christ back!" They retreated, getting back even quicker than they had gotten down. Ted Jones was edging toward me. That boy was simply not part of the real universe. "Do you want me to shoot your weenie off?" I asked. He stopped, but that terrifying, twisted expression was still on his face. "You're dead," he hissed. "Lie down, goddamn you!" "Sit down, Ted." The pain in my chest was a live thing, horrible. The left side of my ribcage felt as if it had been struck by Maxwell's silver hammer. They were staring at me, my captive class, with expressions of preoccupied horror. I didn't dare look down at myself because of what I might see. The clock said 10:55. "Decker!" "Sit down, Ted." He lifted his lip in an unconscious facial gesture that made him look like a slat-sided hound that I had seen lying mortally wounded beside a busy street when I was just a kid. He thought about it, and then sat down. He had a good set of sweat circles started under his armpits. "Decker, Mr. Denver is going up to the office." It was Philbrick on the bullhorn, and not even the asexual sexuality of the amplification could hide how badly he was shaken up. An hour before it would have pleased me, fulfilled me, in a savage way, but now I felt nothing. "He wants to talk to you." Tom walked out from behind one of the police cars and started across the lawn, walking slowly as if he expected to be shot at any second. Even at a distance, he looked 10 years older. Not even that could please me. Not even that. I got up a little at a time, fighting the pain, and stepped into my loafers. I almost fell and had to clutch the desk with my free hand for support. "Oh, Charlie," Sylvia moaned. I fully loaded the pistol again, this time keeping it pointed toward them. I don't think even Ted knew it couldn't be fired with a clip sprung. Doing it slowly so I could put off looking down at myself for as long as possible. My chest throbbed and ached. Sandra Cross seemed lost again in whatever fuzzy dream it was that she contemplated. The clip snapped back into place and I looked down at myself almost casually. I was wearing a neat blue shirt. I've always been fond of solid colours, and I expected to see it matted with my blood, but it wasn't. There was a large dark hole dead centre through my breast pocket, which was on the left. An uneven scattering of smaller holes radiated out from all around it, like one of those solar system maps that show the planets going around the sun. I reached inside the pocket very carefully. That was when I remembered Titus, whom I had rescued from the wastebasket. I pulled him out very carefully. The class went, "Ah." as if I just sawed a lady in half or pulled $100 bill at a pigpen's nose. None of them asked why I was carrying my combination lock in my pocket. I was glad. Ted was looking at Titus bitterly, and suddenly I was very angry at Ted, and I wondered how he'd like to eat poor old Titus for his lunch. The bullet had smashed through the hard, high-density plastic dial, sending high-speed bits of shrapnel out through my shirt. Not one of them had touched my flesh. The steel behind the face had caught the slug, had turned it into a deadly lead blossom with 3 bright petals. The whole lock was twisted as if by fire. The semicircular lock bar had been pulled like taffy. The backside of the lock had bulged but not broken through. It was a year and a half later when I saw that commercial on TV for the first time. The one where the guy with the rifle takes aim at the padlock nailed to the board. You even get a look through the telescopic sight at the padlock. A Yale, a Master, I don't know which. The guy pulls the trigger and you see that lock jump and dent and mash, and it looked like, in that commercial, just the way old Titus looked when I took him out of my pocket. They show it happening in regular motion and then they show it in slow motion. And the first and only time I saw it, I leaned down between my legs and puked between my ankles. They took me away. They took me back to my room, and the next day my pet shrink here looked at a note and said, "They tell me you had a setback yesterday, Charlie. Want to talk about it?" But I couldn't talk about it. I've never been able to talk about it. Until now. Chink on the intercom. "Charlie. Just a minute, Tom. Don't rush me." "Charlie, you have to." "Shut the fuck up." I unbuttoned my shirt and opened it. The class went, "Ah," again. Titus was imprinted in my chest in angry purple, and the flesh had been mashed into an indentation that looked deep enough to hold water. I didn't like to look at it, any more than I liked to look at the old drunk with a bag of flesh below his nose. The one that always hung around Gogan's downtown. It made me feel nauseated. I closed my shirt. "Tom, those bastards tried to shoot me. They didn't mean..." "Don't tell me what they didn't mean to do," I screamed at him. There was a crazy note in my voice that made me feel even sicker. "You get your old cracked ass out there and tell that motherfucker Philbrick he almost had a bloodbath down here. Have you got it?" "Charlie," he was whining. "Shut up, Tom. I'm through fooling with you. I'm in the driver's seat, not you, not Philbrick, not the superintendent of schools, not God. Have you got it?" "Charlie, let me explain." "Have you got it?" "Yes, but..." "All right, we've got that straight. So you go back and give him a message, Tom. Tell him that I don't want to see him or anyone else out there make a move during the next hour. No one is going to come in and talk on this goddamn intercom, and no one else is going to try and shoot me. At noon, I want to talk to Philbrick again. Can you remember all that, Tom?" "Yes, Charlie. All right, Charlie." He sounded relieved and foolish. "They just wanted me to tell you that it was a mistake, Charlie. Somebody's gun went off by accident, and..." "One other thing, Tom. Very important." "What, Charlie?" "You need to know where you stand with that guy Philbrick, Tom. He gave you a shovel and told you to walk behind the ox cart, and you're doing it. I gave him a chance to put his ass on the line, and he wouldn't do it. Wake up, Tom. Assert yourself." "Charlie, you have to understand what a terrible position you're putting us all in." "Get out, Tom." He clicked off. We all watched him come through the main doors and start back toward the cars. Philbrick came over to him and put a hand on his arm. Tom shook it off. A lot of the kids smiled at that. I was past smiling. I wanted to be home in my bed and dreaming all of this. "Sandra," I said, "I believe you were telling us about your affair de coeur with Ted." Ted threw a dark glance at me. "You don't want to say anything, Sandy. He's just trying to make all of us look dirty like he is. He's sick and full of germs. Don't let him infect you with what he's got." She smiled. She was really radiant when she smiled, like a child. I felt a bitter nostalgia, not for her, exactly, or for any imagined purity, Dale Evans panties and all that, but for something I could not precisely put my hand on. Her, maybe. Whatever it was, it made me feel ashamed. "But I want to," she said. "I want to get it on too. I always have." It was 11 o'clock on the nose. The activity outside seemed to have died. I was sitting well back from the windows now. I thought Philbrick would give me my hour. He wouldn't dare do anything else now. I felt better, the pain in my chest receding a little. But my head felt very strange, as if my brains were running without coolant and overheating like a big hot rod engine in the desert. At times I was almost tempted to feel foolish conceit that I was holding them myself by sheer willpower. Now I know, of course, that nothing could have been further from the truth. I had one real hostage that day, and his name was Ted Jones. We just did it, Sandra said, looking down at her desk and tracing the engravings there with a shaped thumbnail. I could see the part in her hair. She parted it on the side like a boy. Ted asked me to go to the Wonderland dance with him, and I said I would. I had a new formal. She looked at me reproachfully. You never asked me, Charlie. Could it be that I was shot in the padlock only 10 minutes ago? I had an insane urge to ask them if it had really happened. How strange they all were. So we went to that, and afterward we went to the Hawaiian hut. Ted knows the man who runs it and got his cocktails, just like the grown-ups. It was hard to tell if there was sarcasm in her voice or not. Ted's face was carefully blank, but the others were looking at him as if they were seeing a strange bug. Here was a kid, one of their own, who knew the man who runs it. Corky Harold was obviously chewing it and not liking it. I didn't think I'd like the drinks because everybody says liquor tastes horrible at first, but I did. I had a gin fizz and it tickled my nose. She looked pensively in front of her. There were little straws in it, red ones, and I didn't know if you drank through them or just stirred your drink with them, until Ted told me. It was a very nice time. Ted talked about how nice it was playing golf at Poland Springs. He said he'd take me sometime and teach me the game if I wanted. Ted was curling and uncurling his lip again, dog-like. He wasn't, fresh or anything. He kissed me goodnight, though, and he wasn't a bit nervous about it. Some boys are just miserable all the way home, wondering if they should try to kiss you goodnight or not. I always kissed them, just so they wouldn't feel bad. If they were yucky, I just pretended I was licking a letter. I remembered the first time I took Sandy Cross out to the regular Saturday night dance at the high school. I had been miserable all the way home, wondering if I should kiss her goodnight or not. I finally didn't. After that, we went out 3 more times. Ted was very nice. He could always think of funny things to say. But he never told dirty jokes or anything, like that. We did some necking and that was all. Then I didn't see him to go out with for a long time, not until this April. He asked me if I wanted to go to the Roller Dome in Lewiston. I had wanted to ask her to go to the Wonderland dance with me, but I hadn't dared. Joe, who always got dates when he wanted them, kept saying, "Why don't you?" And I kept getting more nervous and kept telling him to fuck off. Finally, I got up the stuff to call our house, but I had to hang up the telephone after one ring and run to the bathroom and throw up. As I told you, my stomach is bad. We were having a pretty blah time when all of a sudden these kids got into an argument in the middle of the floor, Sandra said. Harlow boys and Lewiston boys, I think. Anyway, a big fight started. Some of them were fighting on their roller skates, but most of them had taken them off. The man who runs it came out and said if they didn't stop, he was going to close. People were getting bloody noses and skating around and kicking people that had fallen down and punching and yelling horrible things. And all the time the jukebox was turned up real loud playing Rolling Stones music. She paused and then went on. Ted and I were standing in one corner of the floor by the bandstand. They have live music on Saturday nights, This one boy skated by wearing a black jacket. He had long hair and pimples. He laughed and waved at Ted when he went by and yelled, "Fuck her, buddy, I did!" And Ted just reached out and popped him upside the head. The kid went skating right into the middle part of the rink and tripped over some kid's shoes and fell on his head. Anyway, Ted was looking at me and his eyes were, almost bugging out of his head. He was grinning. That's really the only time I ever really saw Ted grin, like he was having a good time. Ted goes to me, "I'll be right back," and he walks across the rink to that inside part where the kid who said that was still getting up. Ted grabbed him by the back of the jacket and, I don't know, started to yank him back and forth, and the kid couldn't turn around. And Ted just kept yanking him back and forth, and that kid's head was bouncing. And then his jacket ripped right down the middle. And he goes, "I'll kill you for ripping my best jacket, you MF." So Ted hit him again, and the kid fell down. and Ted threw the piece of his jacket he was holding right down on top of him. Then he came back to where I was standing and we left. We drove out into Auburn to a gravel pit he knew about. It was on that road to Lost Valley, I think. Then we did it in the back seat. She was tracing the graffiti on her desk again. It didn't hurt very much. I thought it would, but it didn't. It was nice. She sounded as if she was discussing a Walt Disney feature film, one of those with all the cute little animals. Only this one was starring Ted Jones as the bald-headed woodchuck. He didn't use one of those things like he said he would, but I didn't get pregnant or anything. Slow red was beginning to creep out of the collar of Ted's khaki army shirt, spreading up his neck and over his cheeks. His face remained fumingly expressionless. Sandra's hands made slow, languorous gestures. I suddenly knew that her natural habitat would be in a porch hammock at the very August height of summer. Temperature 92 in the shade, reading a book, or perhaps just staring at the heat shimmer rising over the road, a can of 7-Up beside her with an elbow straw in it. Dressed in cool white short shorts and a brief halter with the straps pushed down. Small diamonds of sweat stippled across the upper swell of her breasts and her lower stomach. He apologised afterward. He acted uncomfortable and I felt a little bad for him. He kept saying he would marry me if I got preggers. He was really upset and I go, well, let's not buy trouble, Teddy. And he goes, don't call me that, it's a baby's name. I think he was surprised I did it with him. And I didn't get preggers. There just didn't seem to be that much to it. Sometimes I feel like a doll, not really real, you know it? I fix my hair and every now and then I have to hem a skirt or maybe I have to babysit the kids when mom and dad go out. And it all just seems very fake. Like I could peek behind the living room wall and it would be cardboard with a director and a cameraman getting ready for the next scene. Like the grass and the sky were painted on canvas flats. Fake. She looked at me earnestly. Did you ever feel like that, Charlie? I thought about it very carefully. No, I said. I can't remember that ever crossing my mind, Sandy. It crossed mine, even more after with Ted. But I didn't get pregnant or anything. I used to think every girl got pregnant the first time, without fail. I tried to imagine what it would be like telling my parents. My father would get real mad and want to know who the son of a bee was. And my mother would cry and say, I thought we raised you right. That would have been real. But after a while I stopped thinking about it. I couldn't even remember exactly what it felt like, having him, inside me. So I went back to the roller dome. The room was totally silent. Never in her wildest dreams could Mrs. Underwood have hoped to command such attention as Sandra Cross commanded now. This boy picked me up. I let him pick me up. Her eyes had picked up a strange sparkle. I wore my shortest skirt, my powder blue one, and a thin blouse. Later on we went out back, and that seemed real. He wasn't polite at all. He was sort of jerky. I didn't know him at all. I kept thinking that maybe he was one of those sex maniacs, that he might have a knife, that he might make me take dope, or that I might get pregnant. I felt alive. Ted Jones had finally turned and was looking at Sandra, an almost woodcut expression of horror and dead revulsion. It all seemed like a dream, something of Lemoying age, a dark passion play. That was Saturday night and the band was playing. You could hear it out in the parking lot, but kind of faint. The roller dome doesn't look like much from the back, just all boxes and crates piled up, and trash cans full of Coke bottles. I was scared, but I was excited too. He was breathing really fast and holding onto my wrist tight as if he expected me to try and get away. Ted made a horrid gagging sound. It was hard to believe that anyone in my peer group could be touched so painfully by anything other than the death of a parent. Again, I admired him. He had an old black car, and it made me think of how my mother used to tell me when I was just little that sometimes strange men want you to get in the car with them and you should never do it. That excited me too. I can remember thinking, what if he kidnaps me and takes me to some old shack in the country and holds me for ransom? He opened the back door and I got in. He started to kiss me. His mouth was all greasy, like he'd been eating pizza. They sell pizza inside for 20 cents a slice. He started to feel me up, and I could see he was smudging pizza down my blouse. Then we were lying down, and I pulled my skirt up for him. "Shut up!" Ted cried out with a savage suddenness. He brought both fists crashing down on his desk, and everybody jumped. "You rotten whore! You can't tell that in front of people! Shut your mouth, or I'll shut it for you! You shut up, Teddy, or I'll knock your teeth down your fucking throat," Dick Keene said coldly. "You got yours, didn't you?" Ted gaped at him. The two of them shot a lot of pool together down at the Harlow Wreck and sometimes went cruising in Ted's car. I wondered if they would be hanging out together when this was all over. I had my doubts. "He didn't smell very nice," Sandra continued, as if there had been no interruption at all. "But he was hard, and bigger than Ted. Not circumcised either. I remember that. It looked like a plum when he pushed it out of, his foreskin. I thought it might hurt even, though I wasn't a virgin anymore. I thought the police might come and arrest us. I knew they walked through the parking lot to make sure no one was stealing hubcaps or anything. And a funny thing started to happen inside me before I even got my pants down. I never felt anything so good or so real." She swallowed. Her face was flushed. "He touched me with his hand and I went. Just like that. And the funny thing was, he didn't even get to do it. He was trying to get it in and I was trying to help him, and it kept rubbing against my leg, and all of a sudden, and he just laid there on top of me for a minute, and then he said in my ear, 'You little bitch, you did that on purpose.' And that was all." She shook her head vaguely, but it was very real. I can remember everything, the music, the way he smiled, the sound his zipper made when he opened it, everything. She smiled at me, that strange, dreamy smile. "But this has been better, Charlie." And the strange thing was, I couldn't tell if I felt sick or not. I didn't think I did, but it was really too close to call. I guess when you turn off the main road, you have to be prepared to see some funny houses. "How do people know they're real?" I muttered. "What, Charlie?" "Nothing." I looked at them very carefully. They didn't look sick, any of them. There was a healthy sheen on every eye. There was something in me, maybe it came over on the Mayflower, that wanted to know, how could she let that beyond the walls of herself? How could she say that? But there was nothing in the faces that I saw to echo that thought. There would have been in Philbrick's face, in good old Tom's face, probably not in Don Grace's, but he would have been thinking it. Secretly, all the evening news shows notwithstanding, I'd held the belief that things change but people don't. It was something of a horror to begin realizing that all those years I'd been playing baseball on a soccer field. Pigpen was still studying the bitter lines of his pencil. Susan Brooks only looked sweetly sympathetic. Dick Keene had a half-interested, half-lustful expression on his face. Corky's head was furrowed and frowning as he wrestled with it. Gracie looked slightly surprised, but that was all. Irma Bates merely looked vapid. I don't think she had recovered from seeing me shot. Were the lives of all our elders so plain that Sandy's story would have made lurid reading for them? Or were all of theirs so strange and full of terrifying mental foliage that their classmates' sexual adventure was on a level with winning a pinball replay? I didn't want to think about it. I was in no position to be reviewing moral implications. Only Ted looked sick and horrified, and he no longer counted. "I don't know what's going to happen," Carol Granger said, mildly worried. She looked around. "I'm afraid all of this changes things. I don't like it." She looked at me accusingly. "I like the way things were going, Charlie. I don't want things to change after this is over." "Huh," I said. But that kind of comment had no power over the situation. Things had gotten out of control. There was no real way that could be denied anymore. I had a sudden urge to laugh at all of them, to point out that I had started out as the main attraction and had ended up as a sideshow. "I have to go to the bathroom," Irma Bates said suddenly. "Hold it," I said. Sylvia laughed. "Turnabout is fair play," I said. "I promised to tell you about my sex life. In all actuality, there isn't very much to tell about, unless you read palms. However, there is one little story which you might find interesting. Sarah passed there and yawned, and I felt a sudden excruciating urge to blow her head off. But number two must try harder, as they say in the rent-a-car ads. Some cats drive faster, but Decker vacuums all the psychic cigarette butts from the ashtrays of your mind. I was suddenly reminded of that Beatles song that starts off, I read the news today, oh boy. I told them